Well, all right, final team of the podcast. One I'm sure you're excited to talk about again. The West Greene Pioneers, 10-2 last year. The two losses coming against Clareton and then later in the playoffs. 7-0 in conference. Not really a surprise with a guy like Ben Jackson, but they're graduating a lot, especially a lot on the offensive line. Guys that blocked for him, Brock Badillion, guys like that. Is West Greene going to have enough replacement wise to keep up their extremely efficient offense from a year ago on that side of the ball?
Yeah, I mean their offense is going to be a little different. Obviously, when you lose a back like Ben Jackson and Colin Walker, you're going to have to make some replacements and some changes to fit your personnel you have this year. Um, I don't think that West Green is going to be as dominant as they were last year. I think it's going to be, I think they're going to have a lot of more players. It's not going to be so much like the focus on Ben Jackson and Colin Walker. I think it's going to be several factors. Nathan Orndorff being one, Corey Wise, Wesley Whipke, just to name a few. But it's going to be interesting to see. You're going to really see how good a coach Brian Hansen is this year in his second season. See what he has to work with and what he can do. But I still think West Greene is a playoff team.
Yeah, and that's the biggest question is what is Brian Hansen going to do this year? Because this is his team now. Like last year, Ben Jackson was such a dynamic player that you had to kind of mold your offense toward him. And that's not a negative. Like he was such a great player. He led you to, a very deep playoff run. But this is Brian Hansen's team now. He's had a year to mold his quarterback, and that quarterback's going to be maybe Nathan Orndorff. Not sure yet.
Yeah, it's a little toss up right now. I've seen Brian Hansen quote as Orndorff as the X factor. They started him a wide receiver last season, then moved him to quarterback. That could possibly happen this year. Maybe he starts a quarterback and they mold him to wide receiver, or wide receiver then a quarterback. What I've been hearing Wes Whippy taking first team snaps so far. So that should be interesting to see. Wes playing quarterback. But look for Nathan Orndorff to probably be a quarterback in my opinion. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what he comes up with. He's a very great offensive minded individual. Coach Hansen is, so I'm sure he has something up his sleeve that'll surprise us all.
Yeah, and he's definitely going to need that as far as returning production goes. I mean, Jackson was just such a heavy part of that offense. You're bringing back Corey Wise, the running back, and he's going to be he's going to have to take that next step as your true runner. Offensive line wise, they're going to have to replace a lot, and that's a little bit worrisome for me. They got Casey Miller back, but beside that, it's kind of depleted. Defensively, though, I think there's a lot of good pieces there to compete with. You mentioned Orndorff and Whipke; those guys back in the defensive backfield is going to be huge for them. Linebacker wise, they're pretty deep. In the trenches, it's a little bit light, but it could play up there. Defensively, do you think they have enough to compete? Maybe for a playoff spot this year again.
Yeah, absolutely. The defensive backs, just to be frank, they got torched in the semifinals up against Stowe Rocks. All of them coming back, they'll remember that, and I think that'll help them eventually. They aren't going to see a team in the Tri-County South throw as much as Stowe Rocks. I mean, Stowe Rocks ran pretty much an air raid offense. They had Eric Wilson at quarterback last year, one of the more prolific quarterbacks in recent years in the WPIL. But that'll help them. Like you said, they bring a lot back on the defensive line more than people think. They bring size back. They're not experienced, but they bring size back. They'll have Owen Hughes back, who's about 6'5", 275. They'll bring Tristan White back, who's about the same. Casey Miller, who's about 6'3", 6'4". So they have some definite height and size on that defensive line, but height and weight look good on paper, but it's what you can do with it out on the field. So that'll be the key thing for me for West Greene.
And then I have their most important game at California. I think that game is probably their most important away game for sure. That game is going to be huge for them. It's a game that they dominated so well last year. Again, California was the only really quality opponent they had in conference that was to their level, and they just completely obliterated that offense. And that defense was so good for West Greene last year. So how is that gonna look this year? Losing Andrew Litton at linebacker, Ben Jackson at linebacker. So those are two huge pieces of that defense.